In 2018, one of the world's premier geneticists took a research vessel out into the dark, freezing waters of Loch Ness in Scotland.
He didn't bring state-of-the-art sonar arrays either.
No, he didn't. He didn't bring mini submarines, and he certainly wasn't looking for a prehistoric monster.
Right. He brought a handful of sterile plastic tubes just to collect surface water.
Exactly. And yet, what he found in those microscopic droplets of water completely rewrote a 1,000-year-old myth.
It's incredible.
You were about to find out exactly what was hiding in that water, and trust me, it is infinitely stranger than a dinosaur.
It really is a perfect example of what happens when you drag the shadowy edges of human folklore into the harsh, uncompromising light of modern laboratories.
Yeah.
The results are rarely what we expect, but they are always biologically spectacular.
Have you ever stepped off a well-lit suburban street, walked into the dark woods behind your house at twilight, and just felt the hair on your arms stand up?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone has.
Right. I mean, you know your phone's GPS can pinpoint your location to the square meter. You know you are technically safe.
But the shadows stretch out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The tree line gets thick, and suddenly that pristine, satellite-calibrated map in your pocket feels, well, entirely useless.
We are built to be afraid of the dark.
We really are. We are built to populate the unknown with monsters. And welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're leaving the paved roads far behind.
We are heading straight into the zoological muddy waters.
I love that.
This is the space where our primal fears meet the very edges of our scientific catalog.
So our mission today is an immersive, no stone unturned exploration into the world of cryptids.
Right.
These are creatures whose present existence is hotly disputed or, completely unsubstantiated by mainstream science.
And we've got a massive stack of sources on the table today for you.
Oh, massive. We are looking at the historical scientific taxonomy of legendary sea monsters.
We have cutting-edge genetic analyses of supposed Bigfoot hair pulled from the Himalayas.
We are digging into the psychology of monster hunting, too.
And we are going to look at the devastating, very real biological realities behind local legends.
But to be entirely clear up front, we aren't just sitting around a campfire sharing spooky ghost stories today.
No, we are going to unpack the mechanics of this phenomenon.
Right.
Because while cryptozoology is widely criticized by the scientific community as a pseudoscience, largely because it relies heavily on anecdotal information rather than empirical, repeatable data investigating why these stories persist is crucial.
Exactly.
It reveals profound truths about human psychology, our history, and our deeply complicated relationship with the natural world.
Okay, let's unpack this, because where do we even begin with a topic that spans from the Scottish Highlands to the deep oceans?
There's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. I was looking at a comprehensive encyclopedic list of cryptids across the globe in our sources, and the sheer variety is just staggering. It is a massive cultural menagerie.
It really helps to categorize them based on the environments they supposedly inhabit.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, because historically, that dictates the type of morphology people report. You have the aquatic beasts, which are perhaps the oldest, the Loch Ness Monster, the Kraken, the sea serpents of early nautical charts.
Then you have the terrestrial terrors, the things that run through the brush. The chupacabra in the Americas, the Mongolian death worm in the Gobi Desert.
Followed by the hominids.
Right, the apes.
The hairy bipedal apes like Bigfoot in North America, the yeti in the Himalayas, the omasti in the Caucasus Mountains, the yowie in Australia.
And finally, the aerial anomalies. The flying nightmares like the Mothman of West Virginia or the Jersey Devil in the Pine Barrens.
It's like every single region on the planet has evolved its own specific brand of monster, perfectly adapted to scare the locals.
Yes, and what I love about this is how heavily hyper-localized it gets.
Oh, the regional specifics are fascinating.
There is this delightful, folklore-rich art project I found in our sources by an artist who goes by Mad Guyver.
I saw that in the notes, yeah.
He actually attempted to map out legendary folklore creatures for every single state in the U.S. He spent hours researching and illustrating them.
And what did he find?
Well, the thing that jumps out immediately is that these aren't generic, big, scary wolves. The descriptions are wonderfully absurd and incredibly specific.
See, what's fascinating here is that the specificity of folklore is a feature, not a bug.
A feature? How so?
Well, mainstream biologists discover new species using established, rigorous methodology, right? Fossil records, skeletal remains, DNA.
Who?
Cryptozoologists, conversely, operate on the folklore record. They look at rumor, And rumor is deeply, inextricably tied to the geography and the culture of the people whispering it.
Okay, that actually perfectly explains the geography of Pennsylvania, because it apparently produced something called a squonk.
The squonk.
Yes, according to MacGyver's research, the lore says this is a wrinkly, loose-skinned, completely hideous little creature that is so deeply ashamed of its own appearance that it just sobs constantly in the hemlock forests.
That is just incredibly sad.
It gets worse. The legend goes that if a hunter actually manages to corner and catch a squonk, the stress causes it to literally dissolve into a puddle of its own tears.
Wow.
Yeah, the artist had a great note where he said he didn't judge the creature for its skincare routine.
That is a remarkably tragic piece of folklore, but notice how it reflects the dense, damp, often melancholic atmosphere of those specific Pennsylvanian hemlock forests.
Oh, interesting.
The environment dictates the myth.
Well, it gets weirder. In Illinois, you have the Enfield Horror,
Right, from the 1970s.
1973 to be exact. It's described as a gray, ape-like creature hopping across yards, but it has 3 legs.
3-leg.
And the artist notes that the legs are arranged in a way that mathematically and anatomically requires it to have 2 butts.
2 butts. I mean, you literally cannot make this up.
With the biomechanics of a 3-legged, dual pelvis mammal aside, these details do serve a sociological purpose.
Like the hodag in Wisconsin. It's described as a happy, horned, and emotionally available carnivore born from the ashes of cremated oxen.
Emotionally available. That's what the lore says. Or the classic jackalope out west. A rabbit with antelope antlers that reportedly stops, stares at you like you're the weird one,
Right.
and hops away.
It's very specific.
They feel less like biological threats and more like regional sports mascots for our collective anxieties.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. You might look at those and think they are just silly quirks of bored people living in rural areas before the invention of television.
Right.
But from a sociological perspective, these highly localized details ground the unbelievable in the familiar local geography.
How does that work?
If you tell a farmer that a generic monster lives in the woods, it's just a story to frighten children. But if you tell them a 3-legged, gray-skinned beast was seen specifically near the old L&N railroad tracks behind the Enfield Diner
Oh, the specific.
and tearing through the neighbor's screen door, well, it suddenly roots the myth in a shared reality. It makes the landscape itself feel alive and unpredictable.
Which raises a really interesting question for you. Do we actually need these creatures to exist? Yeah, I mean, human beings have spent thousands of years paving over the wilderness, building walls, inventing electric lights to banish the dark.
True.
And the second we get perfectly safe, we invent a sobbing, wrinkly tear monster to put back into the woods.
We do. We absolutely do. And to understand why we have to transition away from the fun of local art projects and dive deeply into the psychological and sociological drivers behind monster belief.
Okay, let's do it.
Our sources include a truly comprehensive analysis from Psychology Today that attempts to decode this exact behavior. To answer why we need monsters, the best place to look is the modern Bigfoot phenomenon in North America.
Bigfoot is the undisputed king of cryptids. But the crazy thing is, the modern version of Bigfoot, like the pop culture icon, really isn't that old.
Not at all. The indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest have had rich, diverse oral traditions of wild men and hairy giants for centuries. The Sasquatch being an anglicized version of the Halkomelem word Saskets. But the modern mainstream Bigfoot craze, that specifically kicked off in 1958.
In Bluff Creek, California.
Correct. A journalist named Andrew Gonzoli, working for the Humboldt Times, coined the term Bigfoot in a column.
Oh, he coined the term.
Yes. He was reporting on a logging crew in Bluff Creek. The loggers kept arriving at their work sites in the morning to find massive, 16-inch, human-like footprints pressed deeply into the mud around their heavy bulldozers and tractors.
And we should probably put a giant spoiler alert here for anyone who hasn't followed the history. Those footprints were a hoax.
They were.
Years later, it came out that a man named Ray Wallace, who was actually the brother of the logging company's owner, had carved giant wooden feet.
Wooden feet.
Yeah, and strap them to his boots to stomp around in the mud and prank his workers.
Yes. Wallace's family confirmed the hoax after his death, and they even showed the carved wooden feet to the press.
Wow.
But by then, it didn't matter. The spark had caught fire, the wire services picked up Gonzoli's story, and suddenly Bigfoot was a national sensation.
And this fever pitch was cemented less than a decade later by the holy grail of cryptozoology, right?
Yeah.
The 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film.
Oh, the Patterson-Gimlin film.
If you are listening to this, you have seen this footage. Even if you don't know the name, you know the exact image.
Absolutely.
It's that incredibly shaky, grainy, 16-millimeter color film of a massive, hairy, bipedal creature lumbering across a dry riverbed.
Taking those long, heavy strides.
Yes, it swings its arms and then looks back over its right shoulder directly at the camera.
Filmed by Roger Patterson and Robert Gimlin, two former rodeo cowboys who rode horseback into the Bluff Creek area, specifically looking for the creature.
And what makes this piece of film so enduring is how remarkably difficult it has been to definitively debunk.
It is incredibly divisive.
I was reading about that. You'd think a 1967 monkey suit would look obvious. But anthropologists and special effects experts have debated it for decades.
They have.
They point out the way the creature walks, what they call a compliant gait, where the knees stay bent and the foot lifts much higher than a normal human stride.
Right. It doesn't look like a human in a suit trying to walk normally.
And you can supposedly see muscle mass shifting underneath the fur on the thigh. Special effects artists have noted that in 1967, creating a suit with dynamic, shifting muscle structure and a non-human proportioned arm-to-leg ratio would have been incredibly expensive and technically difficult.
It would have been Hollywood level or beyond.
Exactly. Planet of the Apes came out a year later, and their multi-million-dollar ape suits didn't look anywhere near as organic as this thing walking in the woods.
It is a masterclass in ambiguity. But setting aside the biological authenticity of the film, we have to look at the cultural timing.
Okay, let's look at the timing.
Why did the American public absolutely devour the concept of Bigfoot in the late 1950s and 1960s? To understand the why, you have to look at the economic reality of the era.
Because the world was shifting under people's feet.
Fundamentally shifting. The American economy was transitioning away from a heavily industrial, physical, labor-based system.
Right, the post-war boom was changing things.
We were moving rapidly toward a service, managerial, and consumption-based economy. You had an entire generation of working-class men loggers, factory workers, mechanics who suddenly felt entirely stifled.
Because post-war America heavily emphasized conformity.
Yes, it was the era of the nuclear family, manicured suburban lawns, the rise of mass media, and this newly coined corporate concept of togetherness.
So if you are a guy who makes his living with his hands in the dirt, the modern world is suddenly starting to feel incredibly artificial.
It feels sanitized.
Dehumanizing, even.
Precisely. And into that environment of quiet, suburban suffocation steps Bigfoot.
The ultimate rebel.
Bigfoot was not just a biological curiosity. He was a powerful symbol. He represented the untamed wild man. Bigfoot was the ultimate antidote to a fake-feeling modern world.
Why?
Here was this rugged, entirely self-sufficient creature living completely off the grid, rejecting civilization, rejecting taxes and suburbs and bosses.
That makes so much sense. Hunting for Bigfoot empowered everyday folk.
It gave them an outlet.
You didn't need an Ivy League PhD or a corporate title to be a Bigfoot researcher. You just needed a pair of boots, a flashlight, and the willingness to go out into the woods.
Right.
You could look at a broken branch or a weird footprint and say, I'm doing field research. It was a rebellion against scientific elites and a suffocating corporate culture.
Bigfoot is the monster of economic anxiety and loss of masculine autonomy. He is a projection of what a specific demographic felt they were losing.
Fascinating.
But this is just one mechanism of monster creation. The human brain can generate cryptids for very different reasons.
Right. We've seen how a slow, creeping economic shift builds a Bigfoot. But what happens when a monster is born out of sudden, absolute, incomprehensible tragedy?
A very different phenomenon.
Because that is exactly how you get the Mothman.
The Mothman of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. This is a much darker, much more acute psychological mechanism at play.
The lore here is genuinely terrifying. It doesn't start in the deep woods. It starts right on the edge of town.
November 1966.
Right. 5 men were digging a grave in a cemetery near Clendenin, West Virginia. They suddenly looked up and reported seeing a brown human being soaring rapidly over the trees without flapping its wings.
A very unsettling visual, but the sightings escalated rapidly just a few days later.
Yeah, the famous TNT area sighting.
Tell us about that.
So 2 young married couples were driving together at night. They parked near an abandoned World War II TNT plant just outside of Point Pleasant.
Okay.
And in the glow of their headlights, they reported seeing a creature standing near the generator plant.
What did it look like?
They described it as a 7-foot-tall, grayish-white humanoid with massive wings folded against its back.
Unbelievable.
But the defining feature, the thing that terrified them, was its eyes. Two massive, glowing, hypnotic red eyes set near the chest area because it seemingly had no head.
And when they fled in the car.
Absolute panic. They slammed on the gas, tore out onto Route 62, and they swore this creature took flight, rose into the air, and chased their car down the highway at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour, keeping perfectly paced right above their roof before peeling off into the night.
Over the next year, roughly from November 1966 to December 1967, Point Pleasant was besieged by these sightings.
People were seeing it everywhere.
People reported the creature standing on their roofs, staring into their windows, chasing their vehicles. It became a localized hysteria.
Yeah.
But the story of the Mothman does not end with a blurry photograph or a cast footprint. It ends with a catastrophic, real-world disaster.
December 15th, 1967.
Yeah.
The collapse of the Silver Bridge.
Yes. The Silver Bridge was an I-bar suspension bridge built in 1928 connecting Point Pleasant, West Virginia to Gallipolis, Ohio, straight across the freezing Ohio River.
At exactly 5:00 CRA during peak rush hour traffic with cars packed bumper to bumper.
The bridge suffered a critical structural failure. A single microscopic defect in a single steel I-bar caused the metal to fracture. Within seconds, the entire bridge collapsed into the river below.
The death toll was staggering for a town of that size. 31 vehicles plunged into the freezing water. 46 people died.
It was devastating.
It was a completely devastating, senseless tragedy that ripped the heart out of that community.
Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the timing and the psychological state of Point Pleasant.
What was going on there at the time?
In the late 1960s, this was a town already dealing with deep, pervasive trauma. It was the height of the Vietnam War. They had young men from the community returning home either fundamentally changed, deeply traumatized, or returning in caskets.
So there was already this baseline of grief.
There was a low-level, constant hum of anxiety and grief permeating the town. And then on a random Tuesday, the bridge they drive over every single day falls out of the sky and kills 46 of their neighbors.
It's too much senselessness for a human brain to process. You can't just accept that a tiny rust fracture in a piece of metal decided who lived and who died.
Exactly. The human brain completely abhors a vacuum of meaning. We are desperate for causality.
We need a reason.
We struggle to accept random, indiscriminate physics. So, over time, the community's collective subconscious merged the year of bizarre monster sightings with the ultimate tragedy. They assigned a supernatural narrative to the disaster.
The Mothman wasn't just a weird bird in the woods anymore. He became a harbinger of doom.
He became an angel of death, a warning system. People began to say the Mothman was drawn to the town because the disaster was coming.
Wow.
It provided a mythological framework to process a trauma that was otherwise entirely incomprehensible. It is much easier to be angry at a red-eyed demon than it is to be angry at metallurgy and poor infrastructure maintenance.
Okay, I have to push back a little here, or at least ask the hard question.
Please do.
If we know that these beliefs are coping mechanisms, if they help a town process grief, or if they revive local economies. I mean, Point Pleasant literally has a Mothman statue and a massive annual festival that brings in millions of tourist dollars, right?
They do.
And the Bigfoot industry alone is estimated at $140 million annually. So is there any harm in it? Or does indulging in these monster hunts actively damage public trust in actual rigorous science?
It is a highly debated topic among sociologists and scientists, and there are valid arguments on both sides.
What's the argument for it being harmful?
On one hand, yes. Actively promoting belief in cryptids without critical analysis can foster a broader acceptance of pseudoscience. If people are conditioned to value anecdotal evidence, the idea of, I know what I saw with my own eyes over empirical data, verifiable testing, and the scientific method,
Right.
that skepticism doesn't just stay in the woods. It can easily bleed into dangerous territory regarding public health, vaccine efficacy, or climate science.
Right. It trains the brain to say, the experts in the lab coats are hiding the truth. It encourages a baseline distrust of scientific authorities.
It absolutely can. However, researchers who study this subculture deeply, like Daniel Loxton, argue that we cannot dismiss the profound psychological good embedded in these communities.
A psychological good.
For many amateur cryptozoologists, investigating cryptids isn't actually about proving the monster exists.
What is it about then?
The hunt is a mechanism for socialization. It's about finding commonality. It's about building a community of like-minded, curious people who share stories around a campfire or in an online forum.
Oh, I see.
In an increasingly isolated digital world, That sense of belonging and shared wonder is psychologically valuable in itself.
That is a remarkably compassionate way to look at it. It's
Hmm.
not about the destination. It's about the friends we made looking for the ape man.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting. We've talked about monsters born of economic anxiety and monsters born of collective trauma. But sometimes the human imagination doesn't invent a monster from scratch. Sometimes it takes something very, very real and just completely exaggerates it to mythic proportions.
You are talking about the historical transition from maritime folklore to early taxonomy?
I am talking about the Kraken.
Ah, the Kraken.
We have a fascinating academic paper in our sources by a historian exploring the Norwegian legend of the Kraken. As we briefly touched on earlier, this lore goes back deep into nautical history.
All the way back to the 13th century.
Right, you can trace it to 13th century Icelandic sagas. The sailors wrote about a creature called Hafgufa, which loosely translates to sea mist.
And what did they say about it?
They described it as the absolute largest animal in the sea, something that looked more like an island than a fish.
But the myth remained somewhat nebulous, just sailor talk, until it was codified into the very specific monster we know today.
Right.
And that codification happened in the 18th century, thanks to a very specific historical figure.
Yes. Enter Bishop Eric Pontoppidan. In 1752 and 1753, he published a massive, authoritative, 2-volume book called The Natural History of Norway.
A very serious text at the time.
Extremely serious. Now let's set the stage. This is the Age of Enlightenment. Carl Linnaeus has just published his foundational work, Systema Naturae. Scientists are out there pioneering rigorous biological taxonomy, putting everything into kingdoms, classes, orders, families, and species.
They are categorizing all life on Earth.
And Pontoppidan, a bishop with an amateur love of science, decides he wants to apply that same serious scientific rigor to the local Norwegian sea legends.
He essentially attempted to force a mythical square peg into a scientific round hole.
Yes.
He took the wild, drunken exaggerations of terrified sailors and tried to format them like a modern biology textbook.
And the results are utterly glorious. Pontoppidan writes this incredibly straight-faced, highly analytical description of the Kraken.
He doesn't just say it's big.
No. He claims the beast is precisely 1.5 miles in circumference. He says its back looks like a cluster of small islands covered in seaweed and barnacles. And he gives it specific ecological data points.
Data points for a myth.
Yeah, he says it prefers to live at a depth of exactly 80 to 100 fathoms.
This raises an important question about how the framing of information changes human perception. Pontoppidan was not writing a fairy tale.
Right, he thought he was doing science.
He was utilizing the respected language of enlightened science. He blended analytical categorization, specific depths, specific feeding behaviors, ecological impacts on local fish populations, with sheer unadulterated fantasy.
Fantasy like sinking ships.
Yes, he famously claimed that a creature the size of an island could sink massive warships, not by actively attacking them with tentacles, but simply by the massive, inescapable whirlpool it created when it decided to casually submerge back to the depths.
He is basically the ultimate 18th century Wikipedia editor.
Yeah.
He used incredibly convincing, authoritative formatting to publish absolute rumors.
And in doing so, he permanently shaped global pop culture.
Because his scientific framing made the myth incredibly sticky. Other writers and scientists looked at his work and said, well, it's not a poem, it's in a natural history book, so it must be true.
The cultural impact of Pontoppidan's specific invented metrics is staggering when you actually trace it through literature.
It really is. In the 19th century, Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote his famous brooding poem, The Kraken, drawing entirely on Pontoppidan's imagery of a beast sleeping in the abysmal sea for millennia.
And then there's Jules Verne.
Yes. Jules Verne's masterpiece, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Captain Nemo's submarine, the Nautilus, is famously attacked by a giant pulp or squid, and Verne literally name-drops Bishop Pontoppidan in the text to justify the existence of the creature to the reader.
It even bled into American folklore.
Right. The Tall Tale of Stormalong, the ultimate American sailor. There's a story where he fights a kraken, and the author of that story completely plagiarizes Pontoppidan's math, stating the beast has a shell 1.5 miles wide and lives 80 to 100 fathoms down.
It's incredible how a fake statistic just became accepted canon.
It really is.
But the irony of all this, of course, is that Pontoppidan and the sailors weren't entirely wrong.
They weren't?
No. They were just suffering from a massive issue of scale and panic, because the real monster did exist.
Oh, right. The giant squid.
Architeuthis ducks. What's fascinating is that Aristotle and Pliny the Elder had actually documented the existence of giant squids centuries earlier in antiquity.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yes, but those factual accounts had faded from scientific memory, degrading into myth over the Dark Ages. The giant squid is a terrifyingly impressive animal in its own right without needing to be a mile wide.
Oh, totally.
It is the second largest invertebrate by mass on the planet, surpassed only by the colossal squid.
Let's talk about the biology of this thing, because it is an alien.
It truly is. Architeuthis ducks can reach lengths of up to 40 or 50 feet. It possesses 8 thick arms and 2 incredibly long, sweeping, feeding tentacles.
Those tentacles are nightmare fuel.
They are. These tentacles are equipped with club-like ends covered in hundreds of serrated, sharp-toothed suckers that they use to latch onto prey and drag it toward a massive, razor-sharp beak capable of shearing through bone and shell.
Good grief.
And they have eyes the size of Guinea plates, the largest eyes in the animal kingdom, adapted to absorb the tiniest photons of light in the pitch-black abyss.
So, put yourself in the shoes of an 18th century Norwegian fisherman. You are in a wooden rowboat. A storm is brewing. The water is dark.
And suddenly,
a 40-foot tangle of muscular serrated tentacles thrashes to the surface of the ocean right next to your boat, snapping a giant beak before vanishing back into the deep.
you'd be terrified.
You row back to port as fast as humanly possible. You burst into the bishop's office and you say, yeah, it was definitely a mile wide and could sink a galleon.
Absolutely. The ocean was the ultimate border of the known world. It was a chaotic, demonic space in the minds of early mariners.
So the exaggeration is just a coping mechanism.
When faced with something as profoundly alien and terrifying as Architeuthis ducks, exaggeration is a very natural human defense mechanism. You make the monster bigger so that your fear feels justified.
Okay, so the kraken is a real deep-sea animal blown completely out of proportion by frightened sailors in a dangerous environment.
Yes.
We've seen how the vast, uncharted ocean birthed a myth. But the human mind does the exact same thing in our own backyards. When the wilderness encroaches on the suburbs, biology gets warped into mythology.
Which brings us back to dry land.
Exactly. And that brings us to a modern terrestrial monster, the chupacabra.
A phenomenal case study in how misidentified biology creates instant mythology.
The lore of the chupacabra, which translates literally to the goat sucker, is surprisingly recent. It originated in Puerto Rico in 1995.
Right, Madeline Tolentino.
Yes, Madeline Tolentino reported seeing a bizarre creature, and her description went viral. Originally, it was described as a bipedal humanoid, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, with huge glowing eyes, gray alien-like skin, and rows of sharp, spiked spines running down its back.
Interestingly, skeptics have pointed out that her description perfectly matches the alien monster from the sci-fi movie Species, which she had seen shortly before her sighting.
Wow. The power of suggestion shaping eyewitness testimony. That is wild.
It is. But the myth didn't stay in Puerto Rico.
No, it migrated. Over the next decade, as sightings moved into Mexico, Texas, and the American Southwest, the physical description of the creature morphed entirely.
How so?
It stopped being a bipedal alien and became a quadrupedal canid like a dog or a coyote. But witnesses swore it wasn't a normal dog.
Right, it had distinct features?
It had completely hairless, gray, leathery, scaly skin. It had menacing fangs. It retained that pronounced spinal ridge or row of spikes.
And its behavior.
Famously, the defining behavioral trait. It supposedly sneaks into coops and pens in the dead of night to perfectly drain the blood of small livestock, like chickens, goats, and sheep, leaving 2 vampire puncture marks on the neck.
It sounds like a demonic vampire hound.
It really does.
But our sources include a brilliant, deeply practical perspective from Dr. John Tomechek, a wildlife expert at Texas A&M.
I love reading his notes.
He provides a highly grounded biological explanation that strips away the paranormal completely. According to Tomechek and veterinary science, the modern Texan iteration of the chupacabra is almost certainly a coyote or a raccoon suffering from severe late-stage sarcoptic mange.
Mange. It's a skin disease, right? But how does a skin disease turn a coyote into a monster?
Sarcoptic mange is a horrific, highly contagious skin infection. In canadids, it is caused by a microscopic parasite called Sarcoptes scabiei, the mange mite.
Okay, parasites.
These mites literally burrow deep into the stratum corneum, the outer layer of the animal's skin. They tunnel through the tissue, laying eggs and leaving behind feces and molted exoskeleton.
Oh, that is incredibly gross.
It triggers a massive, agonizing immunological response. The animal experiences intense, unrelenting itching. It scratches and bites at itself incessantly.
Which leads to the hair loss, I assume.
Yes, this leads to open lesions, secondary bacterial infections, and a condition called hyperkeratosis, where the skin thickens, crusts over, and turns a dark gray, leathery color. And crucially, it causes total alopecia, complete fur loss.
Okay, so you have a hairless gray, leathery coyote, but what about the defining physical feature of the chupacabra? The spikes on its back. How does a disease create spikes?
This is where veterinary pathology perfectly overlaps with the myth. Dr. Tomechik explains that in coyotes and dogs, hair loss from mange isn't perfectly uniform.
Oh.
The very last place they lose their fur when suffering from this disease is a strip right between their shoulder blades and down the spine, an area called the ruff.
Wow.
So picture the animal. It is hairless, emaciated from starvation, its skin is crusty and gray, but it has a single rigid strip of matted coarse fur standing straight up along its spine.
And in the dark.
In the twilight hours, caught in the headlights of a truck to a startled farmer. That matted ruff looks exactly like a row of alien spikes.
That perfectly explains the look. But wait, if this is just a sick coyote, that makes no biological sense regarding its behavior. Coyotes hunt wild rabbits. They eat rodents. Why would a sick, dying animal risk getting shot by a farmer to break into a chicken coop? That feels like supernatural, malicious behavior.
It is actually the ultimate sign of biological desperation. The disease alters their behavioral patterns entirely.
They're in pain.
Sarcoptic mange is debilitating. The animal is in agony. Without its fur coat, it cannot regulate its body temperature, so it is freezing. And most importantly, it is starving because it is too physically weak to hunt normally.
Ah, of course.
A healthy coyote relies on stealth, speed, and agility to hunt wild prey. A sick, desperate, mangy coyote cannot catch a rabbit. It simply doesn't have the energy.
So they go for the easy meal.
So it takes in...
Okay, that makes heartbreaking biological sense. But what about the blood draining? People swear up and down that they find their goats completely exsanguinated with 2 perfect vampire puncture marks on the neck and not a drop of blood on the ground.
This is perhaps the most fascinating aspect because it relies on a fundamental public misunderstanding of canine predation tactics and postmortem biology.
Let's break that down.
First, the bite marks. Coyotes, unlike big cats such as mountain lions, are actually quite bad at getting and maintaining a single lethal grip with their mouth.
Really? I would have thought a coyote was an efficient killer.
A mountain lion bites the neck once and severs the spine. A coyote has a narrower snout. When attacking a larger animal, like a sheep or a goat, they often have to bite the neck repeatedly, violently shaking and tearing to strangle it or puncture the jugular vein.
Hence the multiple puncture wounds that look like vampire bites.
Exactly. And regarding the drained blood, this is where basic physiology answers the mystery. When an animal is killed, its heart stops pumping instantly. Gravity takes over. The blood doesn't all magically seep out of 2 small puncture wounds on the neck. Instead, it rapidly settles and coagulates inside the vascular system in the lowest parts of the body, closest to the ground. This process is called livor mortis.
The pooling of the blood.
Right. And as the hours pass, the blood thickens and coagulates in the capillaries. So when a frantic farmer finds the carcass the next morning, rolling it over and cutting into the upper tissue near the neck to inspect the wound, it won't bleed.
Because the blood isn't up there anymore.
The tissue appears totally pale and dry. The farmer assumes the monster sucked the animal dry, when in reality all the blood is just pooled heavily at the bottom of the carcass against the dirt.
I have to admit, I find that incredibly sad.
Isn't
it profoundly tragic that this terrifying, supernatural, vampiric monster is, in reality, just a deeply sick, suffering little dog that is starving to death?
It is a tragedy of misinterpretation. Dr. Tomechik strongly urges people to remember that when they encounter a supposed chupacabra, they are not dealing with a demon. They are dealing with a real animal experiencing a serious, agonizing health problem. They need veterinary intervention, or more often, humane dispatch, to end their suffering. They do not need a paranormal investigation.
He also makes a really important distinction in the research about urban wildlife, doesn't he? Because people get terrified when these things show up on their porches.
He does. He warns people to understand the vital difference between a bold animal and an aggressive one.
What's the difference?
A mangy coyote stumbling into your suburban yard in broad daylight isn't necessarily aggressive or rabid. It's bold because it is desperate for food, and its survival instincts are completely overridden by starvation.
And ironically, our own human urbanization is creating more of these encounters.
Because we are building subdivisions right on top of their dens. We are paving over their habitat, pushing them into tighter proximity, and leaving out a buffet of garbage and pet food.
We're basically inviting them in.
Coyotes and raccoons are incredibly adaptable. They thrive in urban environments. Timichik notes that he once got called out by panicked locals to examine the corpse of a tiny chupacabra monster, only to check its dental records and realize it was just a severely mangy raccoon that had lost all its fur.
We create the environment, we create the food source, the animals adapt, they get sick, and then we act shocked when a monster shows up on our patio. It's a lot to think about regarding our responsibility to the wildlife around us.
We've managed to solve the mystery of the chupacabra using basic veterinary science and an understanding of parasitology.
But what happens when we escalate the science? What happens when we throw the most advanced, cutting-edge genetic sequencing technology we possess at the oldest, most famous, most elusive cryptid of them all?
You are talking about the Loch Ness Monster.
Exactly. The myth of Nessie is legendary. It is the gold standard of cryptids. The lore stretches back over 1,000 years.
To St. Columba.
Right. The very first written mention is actually a 6th century tale about an Irish monk, St. Columba. According to the hagiography, he was traveling in Scotland and supposedly ordered a beast to stop attacking a swimmer in the River Ness, banishing it to the depths with the sign of the cross.
But the myth as we know it today, the massive global phenomenon that brings millions of tourists to the Highlands, really exploded in the 1930s.
Sparked almost entirely by that incredibly famous, grainy black and white photograph. The image of a long, serpentine neck and a small head rising silently out of the rippling water.
The surgeon's photograph from 1934.
Which, by the way, was later entirely debunked as a brilliant, petty revenge hoax.
You have fascinating backstory there, too.
Yeah, it was constructed by a man named Marmaduke Wetherell, who had been mocked by the press for finding fake Shippo footprints. He bought a toy tin submarine at a Woolworth's department store, fitted it with a sculpted head and neck made of wood putty, floated it in the shallows, and took a picture.
But the hoax worked perfectly.
It birthed a tourist industry and decades of intense scientific and pseudoscientific speculation. Could Nessie be a surviving plesiosaur from the Mesozoic era? A giant mutated sturgeon? A totally unknown aquatic reptile?
For decades, people tried to prove its existence using brute force methods. They swept the loch with sonar arrays, they sent down mini submarines, they set up underwater camera traps.
With no real success?
But Loch Ness is incredibly deep, extremely murky due to high peat content, and vast. But in 2018, science took a completely different, elegant approach.
This is the eDNA survey led by geneticist Neil Gemmell of New Zealand's Otago University. His team went out and took over 250 water samples from both the surface and the deep freezing depths of Loch Ness.
Now, I need you to explain the science of eDNA for us, because honestly, it sounds like absolute science fiction.
I mean, it really does. Wait, you're the expert here.
Yeah.
How does eDNA work?
Oh, well, it is an incredibly powerful, proven tool in modern biology. eDNA stands for environmental DNA. The fundamental principle is that every living thing on this planet sheds genetic material into its environment constantly.
Like leaving fingerprints everywhere.
Exactly. As you sit there right now, you are shedding dead skin cells, hair follicles, and microscopic metabolic waste. In an aquatic environment, fish shed scales, mucus, reproductive material, and excrement directly into the water column.
So the lake isn't just water, it's basically a giant floating soup of microscopic genetic evidence.
Exactly. And the technology to read that soup is astounding. By taking a sample of that water, scientists can extract the genetic material and use a process called PCR polymerase chain reaction.
Okay, explain PCR to me. How do you find a needle in a watery haystack?
Think of PCR as a biological photocopier. Imagine you find a single, degraded, half-destroyed sentence torn from a massive manuscript floating in the water. You can't read it.
Right.
PCR uses thermal cycling heating the DNA to unzip the double helix, adding specific enzymes and primers, and then cooling it to rebuild the strands. It repeats this cycle roughly 40 times.
Wow.
In a matter of hours, that single unreadable sentence is copied billions of times until it forms a stack of paper so thick you can easily read it.
That is an amazing analogy.
Once they have amplified the fragmentary traces of DNA, they sequence it. They map the exact genetic code and run it against massive global databases like GenBank, which hold the known genomes of millions of creatures.
And this tells them what's in the lake.
This allows them to detect virtually every single plant, bacteria, and animal that has interacted with that specific body of water within the past 24 to 48 hours before the DNA degrades.
It's the genetic equivalent of CSI,
Yeah.
but for an entire Scottish ecosystem. So Gennell runs the water from Loch Ness through the PCR machines. They sequence the data.
And they found a lot of data.
They find traces of over 3,000 distinct species. They find DNA from deer that drank from the shore. They find DNA from birds that landed on the surface to rest. They find pig DNA from nearby agricultural runoff. They find human DNA and countless bacteria.
What about the monster?
What did they find regarding Nessie?
The results were highly definitive. They found 0 giant reptile DNA. They found absolutely 0 plesiosaur DNA.
Not a single drop.
None. They didn't even find DNA from giant catfish or Greenland sharks, which were other popular theories advanced by skeptics over the years. The water contained no trace of any massive unknown predator.
But they did find something completely unexpected, didn't they?
They found an overwhelming, massive, disproportionate amount of eel DNA. Every single one of the 250 water samples they took, from the surface to the deep trenches, had eel DNA in it.
So does this mean Nessie is just a giant eel? Because I have to be honest, a 15-foot thick-bodied eel swimming under my boat sounds almost as terrifying as a plesiosaur.
It is certainly a plausible biological explanation for a long serpentine shape in the water.
But hang on, I want to ask a broader question here. Neil Gemmell is a serious, highly respected geneticist. Why is he blowing grant money and laboratory time on a monster he openly admitted he didn't believe in from the start?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of scientific education, Gemmell's strategy was absolutely brilliant. He gave a quote to the press where he explicitly stated that he used the monster as bait on the very big science hook.
A Trojan horse for science communication.
Precisely. If Neil Gemmell publishes a peer-reviewed paper saying, "We conducted an eDNA survey of a Scottish lake to catalog its baseline biodiversity," maybe a dozen marine biologists read it. It gets buried in an academic journal.
But
by actively investigating a famous myth, he got the entire world to pay attention. He had global news networks, children, adults all tuning in to hear the results.
It's incredibly smart.
He used the hook of a legendary monster to teach the general public how modern genetics works, what PCR is, and how we can use this elegant technology to monitor the fragile, rapidly changing biodiversity of our planet's waterways.
It's a masterclass in public relations for science. It makes me want to become a marine biologist.
That's inspiring.
Okay, so eDNA is amazing for cataloging bodies of water. But what about physical evidence left behind on land? Because if people are constantly seeing Bigfoots and Yetis running through the forests, surely they are snagging their fur on branches and leaving hair behind on barbed wire fences.
They are, or at least people believe they are. Cryptozoologists have been collecting supposed monster hair for decades, keeping them in private collections or small museums.
But I'm guessing it wasn't rigorously tested until recently.
Right. Until recently, it was never analyzed with modern rigor. That brings us to a landmark genetic study published in the highly respected journal Proceedings of the Royal Society B.
This study was led by geneticist Brian Sykes and his colleagues. And what makes this study so historically important is that it was the very first systematic, peer-reviewed genetic survey of hair samples attributed to anomalous primates.
Exactly. In the past, amateur cryptozoologists would simply put a piece of hair under a standard light microscope, look at the cuticle pattern, say, "I don't recognize this animal," and proudly declare it was Bigfoot.
Which is terrible science.
Sykes took a completely rigorous chemical approach. They put out a global call to museums, cryptozoologists, and individuals worldwide, soliciting submissions of any hair that was supposedly from a yeti, an almasti, a sasquatch, or an orang pendek. They received dozens of samples from all over the world.
And the first thing they did, which amateur pseudoscience almost always failed to do, was aggressively decontaminate the hair. Because these things have been handled by dozens of people, right?
Yes. This is a critical point of methodology. If a hunter handled a hair sample 40 years ago and then passed it to his friends, and then it sat in a dusty museum drawer, it is covered in ambient human skin cells and bacteria.
Oh, obviously.
If you just drop that hair into a sequencer, you will amplify the surface DNA, get a human result, and wrongly conclude that Bigfoot is just a hairy human.
So how do you fix that?
Sykes and his team washed the hair meticulously, using highly reactive chemical solutions to dissolve and strip away all surface contamination. They wanted to get past the dirt and the skin cells to the actual mitochondrial DNA trapped deep inside the keratinized hair shaft itself.
That is thorough.
They successfully extracted and used mitochondrial 12S RNA sequencing on 30 viable, pristine samples.
And what were the mundane truths they uncovered? Because I assume there were a lot of disappointed monster hunters.
Very disappointed. Of the 30 samples, the vast majority belonged to very well-known, fully extant mammals. They found hair from raccoons, horses, cows, and sheep.
Cows and sheep. Oh, man.
They found a lot of American black bear hair, which accounts for many Bigfoot sightings. They found hair from a North American porcupine. One sample, heavily touted and sold as authentic Bigfoot hair from Texas, turned out to be human-likely from someone of European descent.
So, a massive amount of wishful thinking, misidentification, and probably a few outright frauds.
Yes.
But wait, there is a massive twist in this study that nobody saw coming. 2 of those 30 samples were completely unexpected.
This is the moment where rigorous science outpaces science fiction. 2 of the samples came from the high Himalayas.
Tell me about those.
The first was a golden brown hair from an animal shot by an experienced hunter in Ladakh, India, about 40 years ago. The hunter had specifically noted in his records that this animal behaved far more aggressively and strangely than the local brown bears he was used to tracking.
And the second sample?
The second sample was reddish-brown hair recovered from a high-altitude bamboo forest in Bhutan, an area located at about 11,500 feet above sea level. The local people attributed this specific hair to a midgehur, which is the regional Bhutanese term for the yeti.
Okay, so Sykes successfully extracts the mitochondrial DNA from these 2 Himalayan yeti hairs.
Right.
And he runs them through the sequencer.
Yeah.
And they aren't raccoons, and they aren't horses, and they aren't humans. What did the DNA actually match?
They ran the sequences against the global GenBank database. Both samples returned a 100% sequence match, with DNA recovered from a 40,000-year-old Pleistocene fossil of a polar bear, Ursus maritimus.
Okay, let me pause and make sure I'm fully comprehending the magnitude of this. The Yeti isn't a surviving clan of Neanderthals. It isn't a giant, undiscovered bipedal ape like Gigantopithecus.
No.
The Yeti might actually be an undiscovered, highly aggressive, ancient polar bear hybrid roaming the highest, most remote freezing peaks of the Himalayas.
That is exactly what the genetic data suggests. It opens up incredible biological possibilities.
Like what?
It might be a previously unrecognized distinct bear species. It might be a strange color variant of a polar bear that adapted to altitude instead of Arctic ice. Or, most likely, it is a hybrid between a local brown bear and an ancient Pleistocene-era polar bear lineage that survived the Ice Age by remaining isolated at extreme high altitudes.
I have to say, this is where science is actually cooler than the paranormal myth. An Ice Age bear stalking the Himalayas is a breathtaking thought. It feels like something out of a fantasy novel, but it's written in mitochondrial DNA.
It is profound. And importantly, it completely dismantles the pervasive narrative that mainstream science rejects the unknown.
Right, because cryptozoologists always say that.
Cryptozoologists frequently complain that scientists are closed-minded and won't take their claims seriously. But Sykes' study proves that when scientists do look using rigorous peer-reviewed methods, they might not validate the magic ape you desperately wanted to find.
But they find something else.
But that they can discover genuine, breathtaking biological mysteries. Science doesn't reject wonder, it clarifies it. It anchors our wonder in reality.
That is a beautiful way to put it. Science doesn't reject wonder, it clarifies it. We've talked about monsters born of trauma, like Mothman. We've seen monsters born of disease, like the chupacabra. And we've seen myths decoded by genetics, like the Yeti.
It's been quite a journey.
But I want to conclude our deep dive with an animal that bridges the gap between accepted biology and cryptozoology perfectly. A creature where the line between a cryptid and a real animal is just a tragic matter of time.
You are referring to the thylacine.
Yes, the Tasmanian tiger.
The thylacine, scientifically known as Thylacinus cynocephalus, is an absolute masterpiece of evolutionary biology. Despite the common monikers of tiger or wolf, it was neither a feline nor a canid.
What was it then?
It was a carnivorous marsupial. It was a stunning animal. It had short, sandy brown fur with highly distinct dark stripes running across its lower back and hindquarters. It had a stiff, rigid tail that acted almost like a kangaroo's, and a jaw structure that could open to an astonishing, terrifying 90-degree angle.
And because it was a marsupial, the females had a pouch to carry their young, just like a koala or a kangaroo.
Exactly.
But what always blows my mind about the thylacine is its shape. If you look at a black and white photo of one, it looks exactly like a strange dog.
That is why it is one of the premier textbook examples of convergent evolution.
Convergent evolution.
Convergent evolution is like two completely independent engineers, let's say one in America and one in Japan, who were both given the exact same physics problem. Build a fast, two-wheeled pursuit vehicle. They never speak to each other, but they both invent the exact same bicycle.
Oh, I see. Nature found the same solution twice.
Nature does the same thing. The thylacine looked and hunted very much like a wild placental canid, a wolf or a dog, but its evolutionary lineage diverged from true canids over 160 million years ago.
Wow.
Nature simply found that the wolf-like body plan was the most thermodynamically efficient blueprint for a medium-sized pursuit predator in open woodlands and evolved it independently on a completely isolated continent.
It's incredible. So how did this magnificent, perfectly adapted creature end up on a cryptid list next to the Mothman and Bigfoot? Drawing from an in-depth historical article in the Journal of Interdisciplinary Science Topics, the path to extinction was brutal.
It was a cascade of ecological disasters, almost entirely driven by human intervention.
Where did it start?
First, it's important to note that the thylacine actually went extinct on mainland Australia roughly 3,000 years ago. This localized extinction is widely believed to be due to the introduction of dingoes by early human settlers arriving by boat.
Ah, competition.
The dingo is a highly efficient pack-hunting placental canid, and it simply outcompeted the solitary thylacine for the exact same ecological niche.
But a population survived on the island of Tasmania, right? Because the dingoes never made it across the Bay Strait.
Exactly. An estimated stable population of about 5,000 thylacines thrived in the dense wilderness of Tasmania. They were the undisputed apex predators of that ecosystem.
Until the Europeans arrived.
But then, in the early 1800s, European settlers arrived. They brought vast flocks of sheep, establishing a massive, lucrative agricultural industry on the island. And when sheep inevitably started dying, often from exposure, poor husbandry, or feral dogs, the settlers wrongly placed the entirety of the blame on the native thylacine.
Which led to the government bounty system.
Yes. The Tasmanian government, bowing to agricultural lobbying, instituted a bounty of £1 for every dead adult thylacine presented and 10 shillings for pups. From 1888 to 1909, records show that over 2,000 bounties were paid out. The population was systematically slaughtered to protect an agricultural interest.
But wait, if the population was 5,000 and they hunted 2,000, the hunting alone wasn't enough to wipe them out entirely, was it?
No, and this is where the tragedy compounds. Hunting fragmented the population, making them vulnerable. But recent research suggests that a virulent epidemic disease, likely a distemper-like virus brought over by the domestic dogs of the human settlers, swept through the remaining highly stressed thylacine population.
So it was a combination of things.
This virus severely affected the juveniles and cut adult lifespans in half. The combination of relentless bounty hunting, rapid habitat loss, and a devastating new virus pushed a 160-million-year-old evolutionary lineage right off the cliff.
It's just so sad.
The last known thylacine, a captive individual named Benjamin, died of exposure after being locked out of his sleeping quarters in the Hobart Zoo on September 7, 1936.
1936. That is barely a lifetime ago.
Right.
We have actual grainy black and white film footage of Benjamin pacing nervously in his concrete enclosure. It's haunting to watch.
So why does the thylacine remain one of the most famous cryptids today?
Because there are constant unsubstantiated sightings, right? People refuse to believe it's gone.
Thousands of sightings. Park rangers, tourists, and multi-generational locals continually report seeing a striped, dog-like animal with a stiff tail darting across a dirt road at night or vanishing into the dense brush.
Why do people hold out so much hope for this specific animal?
Geography provides a tiny, tantalizing sliver of possibility. Tasmania is a large island, about 64,000 square kilometers, and critically, roughly 40% of the island consists of protected, largely unnavigable, incredibly dense temperate rainforest and buttongrass plains.
So there's plenty of space to hide.
The thylacine was historically a very shy, timid, nocturnal animal that actively avoided human contact. From a strictly mathematical and biological standpoint, given the viral bottleneck and the tiny, fragmented population size in the 1930s, it is highly, almost impossibly improbable that a breeding population survived for 90 years completely undetected by modern cameras. But the rugged, unforgiving landscape provides just enough shadow, just enough uncharted territory for the human imagination to cling to.
And I think there's a deeper psychological reason, too. I look at the thylacine as a cryptid of guilt. If you think about it, we've seen how Bigfoot was born of industrial anxiety. Mothman was born of local trauma. But we want the thylacine to be real because it absolves us.
Absolves us from what we did.
Right. If it is still out there, hiding in the deep Tasmanian bush, surviving against all odds, then humanity didn't actually commit the ultimate sin of driving a magnificent, entirely unique creature to total extinction. Its survival would be our forgiveness. We need it to be alive so we don't have to be the villains of the story.
That is a very poignant analysis, and it perfectly encapsulates why cryptozoology endures across generations. It is so rarely just about the animal itself. It is about what the animal represents to the human mind.
So what does this all mean? As we bring this massive deep dive to a close, let's recap the journey we've taken today. We've seen how cryptids are never just monsters. They are highly specific, localized mirrors for our cultural anxieties and fears.
You certainly have.
We've seen how historical myths, like the Kraken, were actually born of genuine nautical mysteries and early, flawed attempts at biological taxonomy. We've learned the tragic reality that terrible, painful diseases create terrifying monsters out of starving coyotes like the chupacabra.
And we've seen the science.
Exactly. And we've seen how cutting-edge science, like eDNA sequencing in Loch Ness and meticulous hair decontamination in the Himalayas, can strip away the supernatural to reveal incredible biological truths, from ancient hybrid polar bears to the heart-wrenching documented loss of the thylacine.
My final thought on all of this goes back to our core belief on this show. Knowledge is most valuable when it is understood and applied.
Hear, hear.
It is easy to look at the scientific debunking of monsters and feel a sense of loss, as if microscopes and genetics are killing the magic of the world. But critical thinking doesn't have to destroy wonder, it just redirects it.
It focuses it on the real world.
When we strip away the fake monsters, we are forced to look at the incredibly complex, fragile, and deeply surprising reality of the natural world we actually live in. An ancient polar bear wandering the Himalayas is infinitely more wonderful than a guy in a Hollywood ape suit.
I couldn't agree more.
The convergent evolution of a marsupial wolf is more majestic than a ghost story. Reality, when viewed clearly, is wondrous enough.
It really is. The truth is stranger and more beautiful than fiction. But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over the next time you look at a map.
Okay, what is it?
We live in an age of eDNA, of thermal drones, of satellite imaging that can read a license plate from orbit. We are eventually going to map, sequence, and catalog every single square inch of our planet, mathematically stripping away the dark corners where physical monsters can hide.
That day is coming soon.
When that happens, when the map is totally full, will the human imagination just invent new spaces for them? Will the cryptids of the future live inside the black boxes of artificial intelligence, hiding in the algorithms?
Well, that's an eerie thought.
Or will we project them out into the uncharted depths of space, simply because our psychological need for the unknown, our need for monsters, is ultimately stronger than our desire for total scientific certainty?
The human mind will always find the edges of the map, and it will always populate those edges.
Because that perfectly calibrated GPS app on your phone, it only tells you what the satellites can see. The dark woods just moved. Until next time, stay curious.